if you've been with us through the last couple classes here, we've been saying that this book that Jonathan Haidt wrote called The Anxious Generation raises a good kind of concern for our society right now, for our world, especially here in North America, but really worldwide this has become an issue with the kind of the technology of smartphones and social media and things like that. And I just want to keep doing this as a disclaimer. We recognize that these are powerful tools. In fact, I couldn't go home for dinner tonight as I was setting up for this. So I have a 3-year-old daughter at home who misses me when I don't go home. So we were able to FaceTime, right? What a cool thing it is. Technology helps us. I can see her face. I can talk to her before she goes to sleep. So I want to recognize, because I know some people have been like, oh, but some of this technology is really wonderful. It's good for educational purposes. It's good for media, entertainment, and so forth. So I just want to kind of say it at the forefront here that we recognize that it could be a powerful tool. But we do want to talk about some of the pitfalls and some of the challenges that it presents as well. Because I think for the last perhaps just over a decade, I think our society at large has been mostly blind to some of the pitfalls. And now all of this is coming up. And in fact, one of you actually sent me an article, I think it was recently published, that talked about how Gen Zers are actually more discontent about social media usage because they're the ones who's grown up using it. They know it probably better than most of us. And they are saying they wouldn't give this too early to their children, right? So they're seeing, like, there's a great discontent. They're sour with, I think that was the title of the article, they're sour for all the social media and stuff. So I think there's definitely a better awareness, and we're being equipped with knowledge, but our purpose here as a church is to be equipped to know how to respond to this. If this is a problem, if this is a challenge that we're facing together as a society and as a community, how can we respond? And so our response has been being present, focused, and rested Christ followers. So tonight is session 3, being focused Christ followers. And I think this is kind of like obvious that we should be focused, and yet it's something that's very difficult, not just for people in Generation Z and Alpha and so forth, but if we are honest about it, I think this is harder and harder to do for us too, even in the older generations. So we're going to talk about that. As I open, I want to share a story that Jonathan Haidt talks about in his book. You've heard me mention it in sermons before too, but it's a 1961 short story called Harrison Bergeron. The author of the story is Kurt Vonnegut. Has anyone read this short story, Harrison Bergeron? No? Okay. When I first read about it, I was like, oh, I don't think I've ever heard of it. And then as I read this story, because I Googled it and read it, because this short story is not that long, I realized, oh, no, I have read this story. I think it was a part of our curriculum in the English 11 or 12 classes that I took way back. It's a story about a kind of a dystopian future. So remember, this is in the thick of Cold War in 1961, and this was kind of a social commentary warning about what would happen if we embraced communism, right? So this was kind of Western English literature kind of speaking on the social commentary of the dangers of communism. And they depict a world in 2081, so in the long, long future, especially coming from 1961 perspective. And they were saying that everything will be equal. There's this government that's gained power, and they made everyone equal. So if you're too pretty or handsome, you have to put a mask on, okay? If you're too strong, we're going to weigh you down with weights. Now, I've shared this at, I think, Sunnybray, and one of the guys who are like obviously very good at working out and stuff, he's like, you know, that would actually do the opposite. It would make that person even stronger. Yeah, perhaps, but it's a short story, all right? And then for smart people, if you're a genius, if they identify you as a genius, remember that was very popular in the 60s, then you would be given an earpiece. It's like a portable radio. Remember, this is people in the 60s trying to look into the future and imagine technology. But we have it now, right? These radios that you can put into your ear where they will zap you with like a loud and distracting noise every 20 or so seconds. And they're saying that will keep you dumb enough. And throughout the story, Harrison Bergeron's dad, it's actually Harrison Bergeron's mom and dad who are kind of the protagonists of the story, as they try to think through, is this government right? Is this the best way to live? Every 20 seconds or so, he gets zapped, so he can't process his thoughts. In a funny way, they were trying to present how society could be so dangerous when we get into this kind of reality. And here we are sitting in 2024, And this is quite literally what happens. We have things on our wrists, in our ears, in our pockets that ping and ring and grab our attention every 20 seconds or so. And this has become a problem societally, educationally, relationally. Even as a church, we're seeing that this has become a challenge. So we're going to talk about distractions and how dangerous it is and how we can overcome it and become focused Christ followers instead. So Jonathan Haidt calls it off-ramps. This idea is that when we are going on a straight path towards a target, there are several off-ramps, right? Do you remember, I remember in Marketing 11 when I took that course way back in high school, they used to tell us how grocery stores would lay out their stores. And milk and eggs used to be always at the back. I don't know if this is still the case. I mean, I took Marketing 11 in 20-something years ago. But it would be in the back so that you walk by all the other junk food and candy and all the things that you might not need and might not be on your grocery list, but it's nice for you to see on the way and go, oh, maybe I will grab a bag of chips. Oh, maybe I will grab Chips Ahoy. Oh, maybe like, and that was by design, right? And your eye level at grocery stores, that's not just random, right? Those are all intentionally designed to make you spend more money than perhaps you necessarily need to. Right? That is the goal of a store. So these are off-ramps, okay? So Jonathan Haidt is saying that there are so many off-ramps nowadays in this world. Now, if you've been around me long enough, you know that I have a rant about smartwatches. I have a mechanical watch here, but I'm okay. I'm all right if you have smartwatches, but let's try to remember the etiquette, right? If you're talking to someone, like, unless there's an emergency and, like, you know, let's say your child's waiting for a specialist phone call and you just can't leave your phone on silent, everyone understands that, right? We all do. But I think it's become a habit that when I'm talking to you or when we're in a meeting, that this is okay now, right? Every other, oh, I got a text message, oh, I got an email. And I think this is like a stronger form of distractions than maybe just text messages 20 years ago. We're seeing that with smartphones, of course, earbuds, kind of like Harrison Bergeron's story, but also this. The newer technologies infused with AI, and like we just rolled out at our church a translation technology based on AI advancements. It's wonderful. Again, these could be amazing tools. And at the same time, they come with some challenges that we should be aware of. This is, these Apple, what do they call them?
Vision Pro.
Vision Pro and Google Glass and other technologies of goggles or glasses that are going to be now smart glasses. These are going to now kind of make social media and video games and pornography and addiction to them even more difficult to fend off for our next generation. So this is something that I think we should just be aware of. The beautiful things about technology, but also some of the dangers and pitfalls of them. Mary, do you have any thoughts on these?
Yeah, something that Jonathan Haidt mentions in the book is that every time that we actually pivot to going off these off-ramps, or getting these notifications, we're actually wearing smooth the pathways in our brain that just reinforce it's going to become easier and easier every time you do it. So it's not just the one time that you look at your watch or the one time that you let your phone distract you from a task. It's actually wearing smooth pathways that will then become easier, and it will become this sort of vicious cycle. And so with that, we're going to talk about notifications and how notifications themselves are also off-ramps and also things that distract us. So first of all, let's go through some of the types of notifications that we all probably get. We've got our messaging apps, which is our iMessage or our texting or our WhatsApp or our Facebook Messenger. We've got our social media apps, which is like Instagram, Facebook, BeReal, those kinds of apps. We've got news apps, work-related apps, which if you work at our work with us, our work apps are mostly Jordan sending cat memes on Microsoft Teams, which can be productive sometimes not. And then, sorry, I can't see what the final is. And then your emails. And so I don't know if we all have our emails on, but emails also send us notifications. And so Jonathan Haidt goes through some pretty startling stats on how many notifications young people get these days. And so I wanted to throw it out there to you because we like doing polls, but I'm going to read the quote where he tells us how many notifications people between the ages of 13 and 18 are getting on average. But what do we think? Just throw out some numbers at us. What do you think? It's all of these different apps put together. How many notifications in a day?
Like, we mean like notifications where like they will literally vibrate
Ding on
or
your phone.
ding
Yeah.
on your phone. 500, 600.
Okay.
How many do you guys get, would you say? Zero.
Okay.
Zero. Look at that.
I actually spent today tracking mine. I had a note paper and pen, and I was doing little ticks every time one came in. I personally got 85 from when I woke up at 7:30 till now. But let me read this quote to you.
Wait, I got 4
Just
since
now?
we started, yeah.
Paul's been bragging all day about how many notifications he gets, so.
Our church likes to send me emails, that's the thing.
Okay, so what he says is, when you add it all up, the average number of notifications on young people's phones from the top social and communications apps amounts to about 192 alerts per day, according to one study. The average teen, who now gets about only 7 hours of sleep per night, therefore gets 11 notifications per waking hour, or 1 every 5 minutes. And so we get this waking hour stat by taking 24 hours in a day minus the 7 hours of sleep, you got 17 hours. And then you divide the 192 by 17, and you get your 11 notifications per hour. And so that's a lot going on, especially for some of us saying we get none. Our teens are getting 192, and so 1 every 5 minutes. And so if
And that's the average, right? So this is the stat for heavy users. Heavy users will be kind of 1 every minute. So every minute of their waking life, they're getting distracted by a notification.
And if you partner that with the fact that you're wearing those pathways smooth in your brain and you don't have the discipline to be able to turn it on its side or to leave it alone, that means every single minute you're pivoting to something different. And so as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about, have you ever walked into a room and realized, I have no idea why I walked in here? And then you have to like retrace your steps and try and figure out what you're doing. This is kind of like the virtual way of doing that. And so I want to tell you about my day yesterday.
We used to call that a senior moment, but now it's called a teenager moment.
Yeah. So last week, I got to work at 9 a.m. And I'm just sharing this to let you know like how off-ramps are real and how they work in my everyday life. I sat down to write an email at 9 a.m. I got a text. My phone was lying like this, so I saw the text. The text seemed kind of urgent, so I stopped writing the email. I went to write the text. Then I got a notification from Walmart telling me that the Starfish Pack food had just been delivered, so I put down my phone. I went to room 104 to look at the food. Then I realized that the backpacks weren't in room 104, so I left the food, went to find the backpacks that the program needs for that. And 3 hours later, I got back to my desk and I realized the urgent text wasn't sent, and the email I sat down to write at 9 a.m. wasn't sent. Does anyone kind of identify with that? Yeah, so it's like walking into a room and just losing your mind. You sit down at your computer and you almost just lose your mind because you've lost your focus because all of these things are happening constantly. And so this is what's happening to our brains as we receive these notifications, and if we don't have the proper discipline, and if we're not talking to our kids about proper discipline, it's almost impossible to get anything done. And I know that we talk as a society about how multitasking is kind of a great skill, but I think that virtual multitasking is actually a detriment to our focus. And Haidt talks a lot about that, about how if you can't actually focus on something, our attention spans wane, our intelligence wanes, like everything pivots. And so we have this next quote that says, "Thanks to the tech industry and its voracious competition for the limited resource of adolescents' attention, many members of Gen Z are now living in this Kurt Vonnegut dystopia." That zapping that Paul was just talking about is happening to some people every single minute.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting because like even I find myself like I think statistically women are supposed to be better at multitasking. I believe that's the stats. But I think I multitask a lot. So I have 2 monitors in my office. I don't know how many of you work in a corporate setting where you have like multiple monitors. It does help productivity in my opinion. It's very helpful as a tool. But I also have like my Google Chrome, which is kind of my main workflow. I have 40 tabs open at a given time, right? And I'm literally listening to the songs that I need to practice for the worship night that's happening this Saturday, and reading commentaries for my sermon, and preparing for this, the slides for this, all in the same time, simultaneously. And you might wonder, like, how does Paul ever write a sermon? My mind jumps a lot, But also when I need to focus, then like for example, my morning devos, I've shared this before. I have a couch in my office, and that's really helpful. I turn my phone on silent. I put it upside down. I put it at my desk, which is about, the distance between here to maybe where Troy is sitting. It's not that far, but that's just helpful. It's upside down. It's out of my sight, and I got my couch, my tea, and my Bible, and I'm able to focus for the next 30 to 60 minutes, right? This is the only way I can do it. And I'm not a child, right? And even for me, I need to make sure I physically remove distractions in order for me to be able to focus, right? So there's tools and habits that we can employ to help us stay focused, which we'll talk about. But one of the things we also wanted to mention is this idea of short form videos, right? Short form videos have become really popular among a lot of the young people especially. But think about TikTok. Snapchat maybe like way back in the days originated some of this. In a text format, Twitter, before it became X, was kind of the originator of this, like intentionally limiting how many words that you could actually use in a post. Now, even though TikTok has done this, now we see it in Insta stories, where it's limited to, is it still 1 minute?
Yep.
Yeah, and then there's other stories like YouTube. There's stories on YouTube, there's stories on Facebook now, and other formats as well. I don't use social media that well in this, but our church does some short form videos as well. The problem is the algorithms that YouTube and other companies employ to make you go through not just that one short 59-second video, but that it becomes a rabbit trail. So this is actually a screenshot from my own browser for YouTube, right? So you can tell it reads and computes all of my searches, and then it does this. Now, you can turn this off on YouTube, by the way. Right? The only challenge, though, is if I turn it off, they give you random suggestions, and I don't like some of their suggestions. Some of them I don't find as super appropriate, so I'd rather not see them. So I'd rather have my random videos. And sometimes, you know what, I get sucked into it as well. But I try to be disciplined. But here it is. It's soccer. What is it? Soccer, tennis, basketball, cameras, movies, more soccer and more basketball. That's me. That's literally what I do on YouTube. I watch highlights because I don't have time to watch full sports events anymore. And YouTube knows that, so it tries to cater more content to us. Because the whole reason that these platforms make money, because we don't pay, well, some people pay for YouTube, but most people don't pay for it. The reason, the way in which they make money is if we spend more time on it. So their whole goal is to make us spend more and more time on their platform, whether it's social media or YouTube or other platforms. So let's compare this to Mary's screenshot.
I watch theology videos on my YouTube. So I got some John Mark Comer theology videos, and then I've got some their architectural digest videos about small spaces, because Phil and I live in 700 square feet, and we just brought home a bunch of beautiful baby stuff from our baby shower yesterday. You got to figure out how to fit it in a small space. And then I do occasionally like a funny celebrity talk show video. So that's mine.
There you go. I feel like John Mark Comer can be like an interior designer.
Yeah, he's a
like
cool
the hipster
guy.
pastor.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's so many things about short form that's really become kind of addictive for a lot of teenagers. But also, I think short form presents naturally some challenges. And Mary, do you want to kind of talk about maybe the detriment when we buy into the short form?
I'd say the two biggest things that I've come to realize is the loss of both content and context with short form videos, because lots of these videos are 30 seconds long and they're just picked out of a bigger thing, a little snapshot, a little highlight, or even with Twitter, X, Facebook, the 280 characters, like you can't flesh out full thoughts in this. And so what we mean by long form discourse is the type of communication we used to have a lot more of before social media and before our culture kind of pivoted and changed. There was way more essay writing, speeches, books and reports, places and avenues where you could fully flesh out thoughts and you could actually have full content and full context. And this is how the huge things happen in our society. If you've seen the musical Hamilton, you'll know that's all about the essay writing back and forth from Sir Alexander Hamilton and the founding fathers of the United States of America. And that's literally how we founded some of our countries and really fleshed out ideas about economics, politics, race, slavery, religion, all of these things. But those were huge essays where you could fully get out full ideas that weren't being taken out of context. And so I think that since we've become so used to short form, and even some of us, like I have a friend actually who she told me she had to delete TikTok from her phone because she realized she could no longer sit through a full movie. Because in her brain, the wearing smooth of the pathways was for 30-second videos. And so it all of a sudden became really difficult to sit through a 2-hour movie because that's just not what we're used to anymore. And so I definitely think that we have kind of lost this long form discourse, and we don't have the patience to be able to kind of listen to each other back and forth, and we're just so much more comfortable with those snappy little Facebook comments and things like that. But I think that this actually is kind of becoming a problem for society because we have lost the respect of fully listening to each other and the ability to actually comb through fully fleshed out ideas and thoughts. And so as fun and animated as these 30-second videos are, I do think that there is some concern of, again, the wearing smooth of these pathways and a loss of attention span that comes with it.
Yeah, and our church is doing something about this, right? This is why we preach 40 minutes, so that you get used to long form again.
Paul's helping us all, really.
No, but honestly though, like if you've probably seen, if you follow any churches or pastors and speakers, you probably have seen some like short snippets of their sermon or their speech, and it's kind of taken out of context. And sometimes it's a very useful tool. I know many churches do it, where like you would take a 30-second clip of the whole sermon, and then it's supposed to intrigue you enough that you're supposed to click and watch the rest of it, right? That's the goal. But if you take the wrong 30 seconds of my sermons, you can make me look like a heretic, right? So I think when we are like fighting, quote unquote fighting, or passionately arguing about different positions on philosophy or theology or economics or things like that, if we're not willing to listen to the other person, like back in the days, they would write essays, dissertations, books, hundreds of pages. And the other person would read all of that. Like we have some researchers in the medicine field and stuff. You would read all of what the other person's saying. And if you want to disagree and passionately, you would put in lots of hours to try to understand where the other person is coming from, and then form a really well-formed opinion and professional expertise or whatever you have. And then you offer it into the discourse. But nowadays it's like, no, I don't want to listen to you for more than 30 seconds to a minute. And I'm going to form an opinion of you, and I'm going to fire back. And I think this kind of contributes to the polarization and the volatility that we see in the modern society now.
I was even thinking of it in letter writing. I remember writing letters as a kid to pen pals and stuff, and you're already paying for the postage. So you better get as many pages as you can in there and flesh out all of your ideas. But now it's changed so much, really, since even 20 years ago.
Yeah. And for this, like the YouTube snippet here, we find that the algorithm of autoplay, you guys know like on Netflix, Disney Plus, all of them have like this autoplay next video. And in YouTube's case, they have catered content, what to watch next. And the algorithm is designed so that they try to understand what you would be intrigued by, so that you'd be tempted to click on the next one. Now, again, I'm not trying to make all these tech companies as evil people. Like not all of them are going to be evil, right? But they do make their money. Their business model is that we need to spend time on their platform, or else they become irrelevant and they don't exist anymore, right? So their financial gain comes from us spending as much time as possible on their platforms. Now, do they have ethical concerns? I believe some tech companies do. That they want you to spend time on their platforms, and they want their platforms to be helpful, but they don't want you to be addicted to them. I truly believe some tech companies operate that way. But unfortunately, I don't think all of them do. And I don't think many of them care about our children, wasting their lives away watching videos for 8 hours a day. Think about that. Some of the heavy users spend 7 hours a day scrolling through social media and TikTok and short-form video. That's a full-time job almost, right? Because they don't take days off, that is more than a full-time job. It's incredible, and this has become a big thing. Autoplay next video, the infinite scroll, suggestive videos to what to watch next. All of these features, Jonathan Haidt would argue, as they were added, the social media platforms evolved. Some of you remember Facebook or MySpace or those like primitive versions of social media where all you could do was write on a wall. Do you remember the wall on Facebook? Like that was it. Now you got the infinite scroll, you got the Insta stories, you got so much more complex ways for them to provide an off-ramp for you, right? And I think this is why the challenges have grown as social media has evolved.
Mm-hmm. And algorithms, they're really, really smart and they're really, really powerful. And so we're going to read another quote from Haidt's book. He says, "This is why short-form video platforms like TikTok and Instagram Reels are said to be so addictive. Their algorithms are able to quickly detect whatever it is that makes users pause as they scroll, which means they can pick up on unconscious wishes and interests that their users may not even be aware of, leading a minor to be served inappropriate sexual content, for example." And so I wanted to just share a couple of examples from my life of my algorithms and how, even without realizing it, my phone knows so much more about me than I am even aware of. And so just a couple of things anecdotally. The week that I found out I was pregnant, my phone already knew I was pregnant. I have no idea how, but everything on Facebook, everything on Instagram, everything on the ads, it was like cribs and strollers and everything. We hadn't even told our parents we were pregnant yet, and my phone knew exactly what was going on. And another crazy thing is, Phil and I have a TikTok account. We share a TikTok account, so it's on our phones and our iPad. But he usually uses it on his phone, and I use it on the iPad. And we realized the other day that it shows two completely different things because he's using it on one device, so it's showing his coffee and watches and phones and like all the tech stuff he likes to watch. It shows it when he opens TikTok on his phone. And when I open the exact same account on the iPad, it shows me John Mark Comer and Architectural Digest and all of these different things because it's genius and it's fascinating and slightly terrifying, but it's fascinating. And finally, another thing is it picks up on the unconscious wants of your desires and feeds you those videos, but it also picks up on what you're passing over, what you don't want. So for example, my family this weekend is going to the Taylor Swift concert in Toronto. Sorry for anyone who doesn't like Taylor Swift out there. But because I hadn't seen the show yet, I didn't want to see any content of the show. So anytime that my Instagram fed me a Taylor Swift video, I would quickly scroll by it because I didn't want to see it yet. And then my Instagram picked up on that. I didn't want to see anything about Taylor Swift. So now guess what? Nothing about Taylor Swift there.
Taylor Swift does not exist.
Exactly, until after the concert, and then I'm sure it's going to be all Taylor Swift. But isn't it just fascinating how smart these things are and how we don't even know what's going on? And so I've noticed a lot about my generation, just how much our algorithms, just how much our short-term media has really affected us, affected our relationships. Like I said, I have a really good friend who's my age, and we're not young. I mean, we're 28, 29, 30. But she actually fully had to delete TikTok off her phone because she realized she couldn't sit through a conversation, she couldn't sit through a movie. Her brain was being shaped and formed by the content that she was watching. And it scared her and it sort of shook her out of it a little bit and helped her to develop different practices. But I also think it bleeds into other things too, like so many of my friends, and I know lots of us in this room do this, so this isn't just my generation, but we're so keen on online shopping and self-checkout and picking up our groceries and all these things at the same time. So it's funny that we talk about how we spend so much time on social media and then we've lost the time. And we're going to talk about opportunity costs in a little bit. But it's shaping our generation. Even I have so many friends who have changed jobs so many times and just different things. All of these values that our society and our culture is moving towards is shaping generations, really. And it's something that I've noticed even in my 20, 30-year-old generations.
Yeah, and I think, again, not trying to make all tech companies to be bad, but some tech companies actually intentionally do this to try to capture our attention, and here's how they do it. They hire people who have graduated from Harvard, Stanford, MIT, right? Some of the brightest minds of the tech world work in these companies, right? And they're very smart people who know what they're doing. And for example, some of the I was talking to a guy who was really into video games, and he was telling me that some of these video game developers are actually the same developers for casinos' slot machines. And they're employing similar tactics of, when they design slot machines, the intent is for you to sit there for perhaps much longer than you should, right? And they're employing similar tactics for these video games to be very addictive for the child to, or sometimes the adult, to continue to sit there. So when you feel like, man, this game, like, oh wow, 4 hours went by and I'm still playing this thing. I didn't even realize it was so easy for me to sit here for 4 hours. That's not accidental. That is actually by design. And I think that's the thing that we should be aware of. And I've heard anecdotally, some of my friends in these big tech companies, global companies that do these things, they told me that their executives in their companies don't let their kids have smartphones until they're like 15, 16, 17. It's like my cousin who's an optometrist, and way back in the days when contact lenses were like kind of starting to become really popular, he wouldn't let his daughters have them until they turned 16. Right? It was like, some families have that rule for tattoos. It was like that for getting contact lenses for them. Because early on, the research, I think, was saying that, for your eye health, it might not be so wise to always use contact lenses. I'm sure the technology has advanced so much now. This is talking about like 20, 30 years ago. My cousin refused to allow that to happen because he knew, he was informed, and he wanted to make the best decision for his girls until they were ready to make their own decision on it. And I wonder if this is what it should be for smartphones and technology and social media platform for our next generation. That we should protect them and try to do our best to equip them for success until they're ready to make their own decision, until they're mature enough, informed enough, disciplined enough to make their own decision. And that's kind of the suggestion from Jonathan Haidt, and perhaps that's some wisdom that our church could also equip one another with now that we have some statistics and data to show some of the dangers of it. The second part of this tonight is going to be about this idea of opportunity costs, and Mary's going to explain to us what this is.
Yeah, a lot of his book kind of culminates in chapter 5, where he talks about opportunity cost. And so what do we mean when we say opportunity cost? We mean it's the loss of other potential gains when an alternative is chosen. Or in other words, something's got to give. If you're spending all of your time doing this, something has got to give, because we don't have infinite time, infinite resources, and infinite money and everything like that. And so if you are choosing one thing, you're sacrificing another thing. And so like we've already talked about today, 13 to 18-year-olds are saying that they are spending about 6 to 8 hours per day and weekend days of leisure time on their phone. So this isn't screen time at schools, this is leisure time outside of all of those things. And that is a lot of time. And that time comes at the cost of other things. And so Jonathan Haidt specifically uses this idea, this term, when talking about phone-based childhood. And Paul covered this in, I think it was last time's class, the difference between play-based childhood, like we used to have, to now transition to phone-based childhood. And it was in the 2010s that marked this huge shift, because that was kind of when social media was coming into things. And so this led to the overprotection of kids in real life. Remember, we talked about the age of independence and how that's changed over the generations, and an underprotection online. And so there are opportunity costs that come with this phone-based childhood that we are now experiencing. And so this is applicable to our kids. This is going to be applicable to Phil and I raising this kid. It's applicable to all of us here, because we use phones and screens to a certain extent, all of us. And so when we look at phone or screen-based childhood and screen time in general, what are some of the opportunity costs that we got to consider? And so Haidt outlines 4 opportunity costs that we need to consider. So the first one is social deprivation. So this is moving away or moving online with our relationships and out of those embodied relationships that we talked about last week that Paul was covering. It also means distracted relationships. It means that we're out for coffee and we're doing this or we're doing this. It's different things, and that leads to social deprivation, which then can lead to social isolation. The next thing is attention fragmentation, and that's kind of like that story I shared. Me doing all of those things one after the other, that's my attention being fragmented to one thing after another. And so some people might call this multitasking. We would probably call this attention fragmentation, because it's not helpful to our ability to focus or stay on one task. And this fragmentation actually takes a toll on the individual's ability to actually think and process things in real time. And another part of attention fragmentation is all of the off-ramps that we're talking about. There's just so many, whether it's notifications, whether it's our hardware, whatever it is, lots of distractions going on. The next one is sleep deprivation. So on average, kids and adolescents need a lot more sleep than adults. and there has been an upsurge in sleep problems for teens after 2013. And so Jonathan Haidt, in his book, he doesn't consider it a correlation to social media and everything that has changed. He actually considers it a causation. The use of screens and social media and all of these things are actually causing sleep problems because of blue light and overstimulation and everything like that. I think probably a lot of us already know this. But even, I read this one fact that was, even if you fall asleep to a show on your iPad or your screen, you're actually still taking that information in even when your eyes are closed, because it's coming in through your eyelids and your brain is still processing that information. And so sleep and screens not always going well hand in hand. And then finally is addiction. And I just did a quick Google search actually when looking at this. I Googled like, how do you know when you're addicted to your phone? And there's tons of different articles and things that tell you things simply as you can't resist a notification, all the way to it is consuming all of your thought. Even if you're not on your devices, you're constantly thinking about what is happening on your devices. And so we need to, as parents, as adults for ourselves, as a community, as a church, be able to do the cost-benefit analysis, or to look at the opportunity costs of what is happening as we are partaking in social media and screen time usage.
Yeah, because I mean, opportunity cost was Caitlin and I, we talked about like we both love languages, and learning new languages and cultures is a fun thing for us. And we often talk about how we would wish we had more time for that, right? Okay, once I'm done school, I'm going to learn Korean or whatever Caitlin would say. These are great, right? But some of the things is like if you're spending 6 to 8 hours on a screen, kind of mindlessly scrolling through content, oftentimes you could learn a lot if you did that every day. Whether it's sports, music, art, learning history, working on your craft as a profession, whatever it is, if you spent that much time on something, like you could do something amazing and grow significantly in that area. And I think that's what we mean by opportunity cost. We can talk about it as a church, as a spiritual thing too. If we worked on our relationship with our God in that intensity and that frequency and that discipline of doing it every single day like that, like, I mean, it would result in fruit that is so much probably healthier than mindlessly scrolling infinite scrolls on an Instagram post. And I think this is why opportunity cost is actually a really, really big thing. And we talked about off-ramps, and there's those like primitive kind of versions of off-ramps and things that, you know, distract us. But then there's like this high level of distractions too. Mary talked about like addiction, right? One of the things that Jonathan Haidt talks about, one of the stats that he shares is there's this research that wanted to study the impact of the presence of a phone. Is the presence of a phone itself distracting enough that you should get rid of it? Remember I said when I do my devotionals, I put it out of my sight? So they did this research. There was a research of, I think it was students who were to do like a simple cognitive test, okay? And a group of them were asked to put your phone at the cubby, right? Just before you come into the room, check it at the door, don't bring it in. The second group, they said, bring the phone in and I want you to put it in your pocket. Don't take it out throughout the entire exam. And the third group was, okay, I want you to take out the phone, face down, on silent, but on the table while you write the exam. Consistently, the people who had it on their table did the poorest on the exam. And then the people with the phones in the pockets. And then finally, the people who had no phone in their presence did much better. So I think we're starting to see some research to show some data on the idea that this has become a distraction for not only kids, but for many people. And some of the things that he recommends is like take a digital Sabbath, right? Like we need to do this for ourselves perhaps, and for our children perhaps, and maybe we need to model it, right? We don't just ask our children to do it, but we do it together. Hey, we're gonna put our phones in this basket when we come in on this day of the week, and tonight we're gonna have fun, we're gonna do things together, we're gonna work together, but whatever it is, we're not gonna do it with this device. And I think that's kind of what's needed because there's next level distractions. This device is a powerful computing device that most of us didn't even imagine was possible when we were growing up. And our generation now has it in our pockets, right? This is like equivalent to a spaceship if you think about like the 1940s and 30s. And we're like, it's in our pockets, always accessible to us. And I think we need to learn to use it as a tool rather than be a slave to it. Now, there are next level distractions coming, and this is why I think this is so important for us to teach our children and ourselves to fight off these distractions. Now, there's so many primitive distractions, but here's a next level one that Jonathan Haidt talks about. Generative AI has already produced virtual girlfriends and boyfriends, such as Karen AI, an AI clone of a real-life 23-year-old Snapchat influencer who used thousands of hours of her YouTube content to create a sexting chatbot. People are already falling madly in love with these bots as they flirt and share intimate secrets with them. He talks about how boys are showing more resigning behaviors, going into their rooms and just playing video games all day, or porn addiction, or things like this. And a lot of the problems is we're seeing that boys are actually unwilling to risk being rejected. It's so much easier when you're talking to an AI sexting chatbot because they will never say no and reject you. And therefore, they turn to that for their pleasure rather than actually going out and finding real human life relationships. And he sees this as a massive problem in our society right now. The fact that these boys are telling these bots their intimate secrets is what's most disturbing to me. Right? That they're not going to an actual person to have a conversation, but that they're turning to these. He also talks about this Japanese phenomenon, this Japanese word called hikikomori. Has anyone heard this word, hikikomori? You've been to Japan, so there we go. Jonathan Haidt says, these young people are called hikikomori, a Japanese term that means pulling inward. They live like hermits emerging from their caves, mostly at odd hours when they are less likely to see anyone, including family members. In some families, parents leave food for them by their doors. They calm their anxieties by staying inside, but the longer they stay in, the less competent they become in the outside world, fueling their anxiety about the outside world. They are trapped. It's that cycle. I think, Terry, this is kind of where you were getting at. It's this cycle of, wow, they're anxious, so they don't want to come out. Not even family is comfortable for them. So then they get stuck in their room playing video games, finding friendships and social life online, which you could kind of feel like you're doing because you feel like you still have friends online and stuff like that. But then it keeps going. Now you feel even more anxious about the real world and getting out of these doors. I've actually lived with a roommate that was like this. It was deeply disturbing, and I was trying my best to try to get him out, even for a haircut, and it would be hard. Right? So this is actually happening in the real world. Maybe for some to this level of extreme, but for some maybe to lesser extreme. But whatever the case, I think allowing them to continue because that's helping them not face their fears isn't the best way forward, because it's actually causing more anxiety for them and more fear, unreasonable fear of the real world. I think this is one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about teaching this and sharing this content with our church family. The distractions and the level of distractions like Karen AI and this phenomenon, this isn't accidental. The ability for our young people to discern and to be disciplined in a world like this is going to be harder than what we had faced. And therefore, we need to be prepared to support, be alongside, equip, teach, and lead and mentor them through this. There are too many distractions. How many times have you walked into a white spot and you see so many young families and yet no kid crying, no baby screaming, because we just take the easy way out and we give them the iPad or the phone, right? We used to do that. I shared this early, right, in this class. We used to do that. We used to download videos on YouTube, so we don't use data. And we would show Cocomelon. Cocomelon should be banned, I think. I'm sorry for the producers of Cocomelon. But it's so addictive for this child. We quickly learned this isn't good for my daughter. We're going to have to take this away. Now, it's hard, right? Cold turkeying this, like saying no to her, because she's now like, she knows that it's right there. She sees the phone, she knows Cocomelon's on it. To say no to it, it was hard. But it was a decision that we felt it was necessary for us to make this decision. And so we did. And so now I'm finding that we need to teach our children how to learn to focus. We take those moments away. I remember Christmas Eve service and things like that, where you're in our room with like 1,000 people, and you don't want your child to distract everyone else from listening to the songs or the message and stuff like that. I get it, right? It's awkward as a parent, but guess what? If you keep not bringing them to these events, or if you keep giving them like a phone to distract them so that they stay quiet, it does wonders for your reputation as a parent because no one stares at you, but it is not helping your child develop the skills to learn how to stay focused and deal with off-ramps. This is why I shared with you guys before that I brought Nathan to a funeral. He's 8 years old. It was a long funeral. But I'm like, Nathan, you need to learn how to respectfully sit through this. And a few times I've had to let him know that, but you know what? He did wonderfully. I'm very proud of him. The other day, or a few months ago, Sarah and Nathan went to Disneyland, and I had Christiane by myself, and we were at this place in Vancouver at a restaurant for breakfast. And Christiane and I were having some pancakes and stuff like that, and she was quite well behaved, but also we were just having a blast. At this point, she's like not even 3, or she's just barely 3. She's having a blast, right? And the lady beside me, she came with her grandchildren, and clearly she was treating her grandchildren for a nice breakfast. And as she was leaving, she told me, I'm so glad to see that you did not pull out your phone once throughout this whole breakfast. And again, I wasn't always there, but this was a decision that I had to make for the development of my child. And this focused, undistracted relationship with her, this time that we have together, is amazing for our relationship. It's a great thing. It's the best thing that a person can give to another, undivided attention, which is, by the way, what our God gives to us. So in a way, I can't believe that that's an impressive thing in our culture now. But it is. It is. And once the child, I believe children are more resilient than we give them credit for. Once we mirror this behavior for them, they will eventually learn. They will eventually be able to have a chance at focusing. Jonathan Haidt talks about the idea of a frontal cortex in our brains. And in young children, the frontal cortex has not been fully developed yet. So when the Netflix video comes up and says, do you want to watch the next video? It's not Nathan's fault when he's not able to say no to that. And he just lets it play. I got angry at him and said, hey, I told you only one episode. Why are you watching a second one? And then I read this book. I'm like, okay, my bad. It's not your fault. It's mine. Give a kid a smartphone and tell them you can't use this or you can't use that. You got to behave. You got to watch yourself. And then they fail, and then we get angry at them. And Jonathan Haidt and other scientists are telling us that's not fair. Because in their brain, in the prefrontal cortex, where it's supposed to help you learn discipline and self-control, it's not fully developed yet. So they're physiologically not able to do this, and you're setting them up for failure, and then, worse, you're blaming them for it. And therefore, I think this is a great opportunity for parents to learn this, and teachers and colleagues and others in our society to become this community where we can set our next generation up for success, teaching them how to remain focused. I want to end on this note on Ephesians. In Ephesians chapter 5, Paul says this very famous text that Christians love quoting from. He says, look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. And do not get drunk with wine, for that is debauchery, but be filled with the Holy Spirit, addressing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody to the Lord with your heart, giving thanks always for everything to God, the Father, in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. Think about what this text is talking about. In Paul's day, getting drunk with wine was actually, it wasn't just one of the random things that he talks about. This was actually an issue in the Ephesian church. So what does he do as a leader, as a servant of this church? He tells them, you can't be doing that because, let's go back to opportunity cost. We need to redeem the time, Paul would say. We need to make best use of the time. Rather than spending your time drunk in wine, Your life would be so much more meaningful and fulfilled if you redeem the time to do what the Lord's will is. It's this idea that actually calling our children, calling ourselves to a task is so much better than telling them, okay, you're afraid, so don't do anything. The worst thing that could happen to this anxious generation is for them to be told, you don't need to do anything. The best thing for them to be told and invited into is giving them something that's better, an alternative that's worth fighting for. Giving them a vision for life that compels them to perhaps leave whatever they're currently stuck in and trapped in. And not just calling them to it and then blaming them and then shaming them when they can't do it, but coming alongside them and actually holding their hand, supporting them as Christ did for us, and helping them come out of this together. As a community, doing it together. Making the best use of our time, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. I think setting our gaze upon Jesus and calling ourselves to live a missional life with purpose and true significance and meaning is what this world needs. We talked about it in the context of gospel joy on Sunday for those of us who were there. But really, truly, that's what I believe. Calling people to a discipleship in Christ, calling them to a missional life, is actually the most helpful thing in life. We started by Gerard asking, what about the theology of work? Here it is. I promise we'd get here, right? Here it is. Giving our children deep meaning and significance in life is the best way to help them live a focused life as a follower of Jesus. And I think this is what we're going to end at next week. Next week, we're going to have our final session, and it's on being rested. We've talked a lot about the stats and stuff so far. Next week, it'll be mostly about the Bible and what it talks about us being rested. John Mark Comer said it famously, this is not a call to do more. This is actually a call to do less. And it is significantly more difficult for us to do less in this world. But that's what it'll take for us to be focused and be present and be rested so that, like we had that question earlier, that we're actually able to come alongside people and help. When we are all tapped out as a society, remember the mirror neurons? We will only add to the anxiety. If we want our children to have a shot at this, we need to learn to say no to things, slow down, and create space in our calendars, in our resources, in our emotional capacity, so that we can be present and focused. Undivided, present, focused time together. It's going to do wonders for our relationships, don't you think? Yeah. Any questions as we close?